So in my last video, I showed you several tech tools and gadgets I use and would recommend, but that's only half the story. Today on Mackie Tech, I'm going to show you how they actually fit into my setup from my home lab and testing hardware to my studio here. Everything I feature here I bought with my own money, with the exception of the portable monitor from Andycine, which was sent out last year for a review. So if you're new here and enjoy home lab tutorials and reviews, please consider subscribing to Mackie Tech so you don't miss my upcoming videos. And with all of that out of the way, let's jump in. So when I'm testing different systems, which is quite often, one of the first things I rely on is this KVM Switch. It lets me control different systems or multiple systems using one keyboard, monitor, and mouse without having to swap between them. For example, if I'm working with something like a Raspberry Pi, instead of switching monitors or messing around with cables, I just plug everything into the KVM switch and press a button so I can switch between the Raspberry Pi and my main system. Some KVM switches also include extra USB ports like here, so you can share things like extra jump drives, cameras, or speakers as well. It saves a lot of time, keeps my desk very clean, and I don't need to have separate accessories for every system I'm using. Beyond keeping things neat and organized, efficiency is also critical, which brings me to the NVMe drives. NVMe drives are kind of like the race cars of storage. I use one in my Ugrain NAS, and what it does here is keep the data I used most often on that faster drive. So when I'm transferring data or scrubbing through video footage, everything just feels a lot more responsive. I've also used an NVMe in this enclosure to load OS images onto boards that require USB boot. As an example, setting up this compute module for my CM-RAT review I did last year. Another thing I use quite a bit, both on my test bench and in my studio, is this power station. I use this to cut down on cable clutter in both areas. Instead of dealing with a bunch of separate power bricks or cables everywhere, I can power my monitors, computers, accessories, and testing gear all from one place, and I'm not constantly fumbling under the desk or looking for extension cables. It just makes the setup a lot cleaner and a lot easier to work with, which is most important. Another tool that's sort of my Swiss Army knife, especially when testing, is this 9-in-1 USB hub. As an example, one of my main editing stations is my Mac. But like most modern laptops, it's pretty limited on ports. So when I'm testing products, this lets me connect things like my AverMedia capture card so I can record footage from other systems without constantly swapping cables or juggling a lot of adapters. And that brings me back to my home lab, where one thing I don't mess around with is backup power, because it's never ideal to suddenly cut power to computers or servers, especially ones with spinning drives, which can lead to data loss or even permanent damage. To prevent that, I use two battery backups, one from my servers and NAS and another from my networking gear. Each one has a battery that keeps everything running during an outage, but more importantly, it gives me a few minutes to safely shut everything down. Something else I use a lot are smart devices to control lights and set up simple scenes. As an example, like saying good night and having the downstairs light turn off, while at the same time the upstairs lights turn on. In my studio, I've taken that a step further, using Zigbee devices to control all 6 of my studio lights with a remote. Zigbee is similar to Wi-Fi, but it's built specifically for smart devices, so it's more reliable and responsive. And instead of always relying on something like Alexa, I'm using Home Assistant, which gives me a lot more control and isn't tied to the overlords over at Amazon. I can create custom automations, tie everything together exactly how I want, and everything runs locally, so I'm not dependent on cloud services for it all to work. That brings me to this portable monitor, which ended up being way more useful than I expected because I use it across pretty much every part of my setup. In my test bench, it works as a second display when I'm testing different systems. In the studio, I use it as a field monitor for my camera so I can actually see what I'm filming, especially for overhead and B-roll shots. And even in my home lab, I've used it to troubleshoot servers here and there, thanks to its lightweight and full-size HDMI port. It also mounts to a tripod, which saves space while keeping everything portable and easy to access. So that is what my setup actually looks like. Nothing too fancy or crazy, just practical tools that help things run a lot smoother around here. And so now you've seen how the sausage is actually made. I'd like to hear about what your favorite devices are and how they're beneficial for you in your setup. Anyway, that's going to wrap this up, folks. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and be sure to drop your feedback in the comments. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to Mackie Tech if you haven't done so already. A special shout out to Dom as well as the rest of you who are supporting the channel. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we'll be talking to you all again very soon.